All right. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is the first iteration of our Research and Language Learning series for this semester, but this is a program that has been going for a few semesters now, where we invite established scholars and students to come talk about their language learning journeys and the role language learning has played in their research and career. We hope that by hosting this series, we can talk about a subject that's not always visible in the finished product of a manuscript or something that gets published, but is nonetheless very important to our field and to our work. We're delighted today to have Dr. Nathan Wood joining us. Dr. Wood is an associate professor in the Department of History at Kansas University. His area of specialization includes 19th and 20th century urban histories of Eastern Europe and particularly Poland. He's been supported by a number of international grants, including the International Research Exchange, American Council of Learned Societies, and the Fulbright Program. He's also received the W.T. Kemper Award for Excellence in Teaching. And his current book project investigates the attitudes of early adopters, enthusiasts, journalists, the public, avant-garde artists, and the nationalizing state toward bicycles, automobiles, and airplanes from their introduction until World War II. So with that, Dr. Wood, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to have this opportunity to reflect on how studying Polish has shaped me and shaped my career. I'm going to share the screen. I've prepared just some slides to make this a little more interesting, I hope. So, let's see. I've titled my talk, Curiosity, Tenacity, and Humility, Lessons from Learning Polish with Purpose. And I want to begin with a little bit of an introduction. I'm grateful, Catherine, for the introduction and Olga for the invitation. Thank you very much for the opportunity to muse on this. And thank you, all of you who've taken the time to attend. So I'm a historian of modern Europe. I'm really interested in the period from about 1885 to 1939, a moment of rapid urbanization, modernization, mobility, acceleration, political ferment, warfare, of course, the Great War, the First World War, and changing conceptions of identity. My first book, Becoming Metropolitan, Urban Selfhood and the Making of Modern Krakow, explores the moment when the primarily Polish-speaking Habsburg city of Krakow became a big city, largely as this process was depicted in the popular illustrated press, what we call the Boulevard Press. My second book project, Backwardness and Rushing Forward, Cycling, Motoring, and Aviation in the Polish Lands, 1885 to 1939, considers the way that technologies of speed and mobility can ironically make people feel left behind or behind. And I love this image here in the middle. This is by the very famous Polish Krakowian artist Wojciech Kosak, The Mountaineer's Wedding Party from 1934. And it was an ad for the Polish Fiat company manufacturing Fiat automobiles under license in Poland. And Kosak was famous for his depiction of horses. And it's hilarious that even when he gets commissioned to do an ad for an automobile, he puts the horses in front. Obviously, they're not going to stay that way. But anyhow, this image, I think, helps to capture this sense of rushing forward, but also perhaps feeling behind. And just lately, the past couple of years, I've been working on a third project that I hope will become my third book project on the bison, the zubry of the Białowieża primeval forest, which is currently on the border of Poland and Belarus. So, I mean, I've studied a number of languages, French, Polish, Russian, Czech, and German, but I feel disproportionately proficient in Polish in comparison to the other languages that I've studied. And this fact has substantially affected my research questions and trajectory. Polish language sources are the central means that I have at my disposal to answer the questions that intrigue me. So I would say that, like many historians, specialize in a particular kind of historical inquiry. So, for example, urban history or political history or labor history. And they produce multiple works of scholarship in that field. And I think my path has been slightly different. And it has a lot to do with languages and language proficiency. So for me, my first big project was a work of urban and press history. My second project, more technological history of technology and cultural history. And I use a lot of science fiction and art as sources. And this third project, if I can pull it off, is an environmental history. And so you could say that rather than bolstering my knowledge of multiple languages in order to answer many questions in a single field, I've kind of stuck with one language, place, and time, and I'm trying different methodologies with that tool. So in many respects, Polish, rather than being a particular Polish, I'm sorry, rather than a particular kind of historical inquiry, has been my tether. So Olga sent me some questions. I'm going to try and answer some of those questions, and then would be happy to talk with you more generally and be as helpful as I can. I mean, I hope my own experience is of some use to those of you who are listening. The question I often get, maybe not phrased exactly this way, is how did someone with a bland Anglo-Saxon last name like mine end up studying Polish? And the answer is that I was reared in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I grew up as a practicing member of that church, descendant of Mormon pioneers. And when it was time to serve a mission at age 19, I was sent to Poland. It's really that simple. I didn't have a choice in the matter. I submitted papers saying I was willing to serve, and I got sent to Poland. I felt very lucky at the time because I had been very, very interested in Poland and East Central Europe generally. With the collapse of communism in 1989, I had a really enterprising history professor who, taking materials that he had gathered from news magazines and other publications in 1989 as the collapse happened, created a course and taught it in the spring of 1990, so my senior year of high school. And I was absolutely mesmerized. And so when I submitted my papers to go on a mission, I hoped I might go to Eastern Europe or maybe to Africa. And I was very happy to be sent to Poland, where incidentally, I ended up meeting lots of African students in Wrocław. So I lived in Warsaw for about 4.5 months, then in Wrocław for 8.5 months, and then in the resort town of Sopot as part of the Tri-City area up on the Baltic between Gdynia and Gdańsk for much of 1992 and 93 for 10.5 months. So learning Polish intensively as a missionary meant that I had lots of training, not only in grammar, but also very particular vocabulary. So I'm sure that I learned the word for atonement, zadośćuczynienie, before I learned the word for, say, pickle, ogórek. So we had laminated cards that we used to study. I have these cards here, and I don't refer to them a lot anymore, but they were really invaluable. So prepositional case markers, Polish personal pronouns, the Polish cases, and the various endings and what they do to words, verb conjugations. So we had these laminated cards that we could keep in our pockets or in our bags. We used Clara Kaipio's 201 Polish verbs. I studied from Oscar Swan's textbook, and this worn out Polish English dictionary, pocket dictionary, was my dear friend as I was trying to learn the language. When I got to Poland, I recall trying not only to learn the words that I needed to do my job, but also for things that interested me. And so, for example, I wrote down, as you can see in these notebooks, in this notebook, all of these words for Polish trees, the names for trees. And I can't tell you how useful that has been over the last 30 plus years, being in a conversation and just happening to know that because it had been something that I was interested in as a young man. I draw your attention, those of you who might read Polish, to the first image, the one that's in front of Brian Porter-Such's book, which just happened to be on my desk this morning, where I wrote, Codziennie uczę się coraz więcej polskiego. Every day I'm learning more and more Polish. That was something I wanted to be able to say to others, but I have to confess it was extremely difficult, even after 2 months of intensive language study. When I got to Poland, it was kind of dispiriting how little I understood and how little I was able to communicate with others. And thankfully, I had a sort of a check mark or a way to check my progress each Sunday as I attended Sunday services. I could tell that I understood just a little bit more. But I remember after one sermon that I just didn't understand hardly anything, drawing a picture of a car in my notebook. And after the sermon was over, a teenage boy next to me pointed to the car and he said, Bemvu, Bemvu. And I didn't understand his question. And he had to spell it out. And I realized that BMW is pronounced differently in Polish. Bemvu, Bemvu, he was asking. So I spent a lot of time talking to people on the street, in public transportation, doing service projects at retirement homes or orphanages, and in offering free English classes on Saturday mornings as a way to meet prospective converts. And teaching my own language to Polish speakers really helped me grasp both languages better. When I returned to Louisiana from Poland in 1993, I guess I'll say that for just a second, and resumed my university studies, I took a European history class. And it was then that I realized what I wanted to do professionally, which is to teach modern European history and make sure that Central Europe, East Central Europe, doesn't get left out, that it's a part of the story. And amazingly, that plan has worked out. I feel really, really fortunate. My most popular class today is on World War I. And of course, we learn about the trenches on the Western Front and read British war poems like everyone else does, but I take special pride in teaching my students all about the experience on the Eastern Front in that class. So once I knew what I wanted to do with my life, I knew I would need more formal academic training in Polish. So I got a Kościuszko Foundation grant to go to Krakow in the summer of 1995 to study the Polish language, history, and culture at the Jagiellonian University. And I was really proud to have tested into the top language level that they offered that summer, and then to be awarded at the end of this session as the star pupil. And I think I really let that go to my head. And pretty much every experience since then has been this humbling reminder how little I still know and how much I still need to learn in Polish. I still, of course, make many, many mistakes and have lots of things that I could do better. When I went to graduate school, I got a FLAS fellowship. So those are the Foreign Language Area Studies fellowships for my first year of graduate school at Indiana University, where I was really privileged to study with the brilliant Bożena Shallcross, now at the University of Chicago. And we worked on nuances of translation of primary sources. We watched Polish films. I read literature. I tried to translate poetry. And then since then, I really haven't had any more formal Polish language study, but I use it, of course, to do my research, communicate with friends and others in Poland while I'm there in the country. And I notice that sometimes my jaw hurts when I go back to Poland and I'm trying to make my mouth make the sounds that I want. Despite deliberately working on this, I'm content to know that I have an accent, and I will continue to botch an ending here or there, use the wrong prefix, deploy a transitive verb when an intransitive one is called for, et cetera, et cetera. So Jay Winter, the esteemed historian of the First World War, visited Indiana University while I was a graduate student there. And I had the privilege to go out to lunch with him, and we were talking about cultural history and what it takes to be a cultural historian. And Winter said, more or less, I don't have quotation marks here because I'm paraphrasing, but more or less, to be a good cultural historian, you have to know the language and culture well enough to get the jokes. And the problem, he said, is that learning a language and culture that well takes a lot of time. And he said also, to be a good cultural historian, you have to be comparative. And so the difficulty is that most of us aren't so gifted or so lucky, perhaps, to have been reared in a multilingual way, to be able to know a language and a culture well enough to get the jokes. And so he said that the solution probably needs to be more collaborative work, more shared effort in cultural history. And to his credit, that's what he's done as a historian of the First World War, is really worked quite hard with other scholars to broaden our understanding of that conflict. For me, here are some examples of some jokes that I use, cartoons that I use in my teaching about Poland since the collapse of communism, Poland in the last 30 or 40 years. These are by Andrzej Mleczko. I subscribe to Mleczko's Instagram feed, and he often tells jokes verbally. And I get a lot of them, but not all of them. But I'm reminded of Jay Winter's statement there. Here's just some more cartoons. And I appreciate his Mleczko here, his humor about the influx of capitalism and Americanization in his society. So on the left side, the boy was so influenced by commercials on TV, modern commercials, that he bought Whiskas and he didn't even have a cat. And in the other, all the signs of Americanization are around. These cartoons are both from 1991. All right, so now to try and see if what lessons there might be from someone whose experience admittedly is probably not like yours if you're studying a language. Are there any takeaways? And obviously I learned Polish pretty much in a pre-internet age. I learned it as a missionary, which makes me, I think, odd and unusual. But again, perhaps something will be of use. So some of my lessons, my takeaways. One, learning a language with a purpose. When I first got to Poland, the stakes were pretty high for me. I really thought it was about saving souls. I no longer believe that. And I think even as I was there, you could say Poland converted me, and that became my passion. But we do need to have some sort of motivation. So whether it's to understand a musician, or it's to be able to read sources in a particular language, or to conduct social science surveys, if you have a purpose and drive, I think it's really going to help, because language study is difficult. You should be curious. Pursue the aspects of the language that interest you. Develop a specialized vocabulary. So that example of learning the trees was something that was meaningful for me, something I was interested in. I didn't know at that time whether or not I wanted to pursue botany or dendrology or biology, or if I wanted to go into the humanities. And I'm really grateful that I developed that specialized vocabulary. 3, you have to be humble. I'm consistently humbled in mistakes I might make or the things that I don't quite understand. This summer, I went to Białowieża National Park in Poland. And as I rode up on my rented bicycle, there was a news crew there, and they pulled me over and interviewed me. And I could tell as I was talking that I didn't quite know why they were interviewing me and what they were interested in. And I knew that I'd made some mistakes. And I took pleasure in the fact that I probably didn't have anything relevant to say. And then the next morning, when I went on my guided tour, the tour guide went around and was asking everyone where they're from. And she said, I know who you are. I saw you on the news last night. So I was pretty embarrassed. I'm glad that I can't find that video clip. But that's fine. I think if you're humble about your language skills, then you're less apt to get frustrated. And it helps you in trying to be patient and tenacious in learning more. So language proficiency is a skill that requires tenacity to master. For some people, learning language is a passion, or even learning languages. So every time that I'm on the FLAS committee here at KU, I see applications from people who are serial language learners. They just love it. And when I got home from Poland and tried to study Russian and Czech and German, I quickly realized that I wasn't one of those people. My proficiency in Polish had come because I lived there, and I had a huge desire to learn the language and understand the culture. I put in the work. So studying German in graduate school, I just came to the humbling realization that I'm not naturally gifted in language study, but now I really don't even believe in the whole natural baloney about one's sort of skills or aptitudes. I really do think it has to do with work and motivation. And so I realized now why I was able to learn Polish is because I was there and because it meant a lot to me. I was taking it very seriously, and I was working really hard at it. So this leads to the next point, immersion. If you want to study a language, do your best to immerse yourself in it. There's a variety of ways you can do that. You can get a foreign language area studies fellowship and work intensively on that at the summer, over the summer, both in country or here in the States. Apply for a Kosciuszko Foundation grant. Try to teach English in a foreign country. Just get to a place where they speak that language if you can, and immerse yourself in it. And then the final lesson I hope that one can draw from my experience here is that language skills are ultimately a tool. So it's okay if your language skills aren't brilliant. So long as you can do what you need to do with those languages, get around, shop, use the archives, conduct a survey, etc., you're fine. So I made very deliberate choices in my research based on my own capabilities. So for example, I knew I was interested in the turn of the century. I love Stanisław Wyspiański. I loved his art and to a lesser extent his poetry and his plays, but I found them kind of impenetrable as a non-native speaker, and I didn't know that I would be able to make sophisticated interpretations of those sorts of things. But ordinary people, I had spent time talking with ordinary people, and when I found the Popular Illustrated Press, the Boulevard Press, which was written after all for newly literate people, I realized I'd found a great source. It was a good match for me. It was something that I could really make useful interpretations of and have something interesting to say about. So I just wanted to, I got a couple of additional questions from Olga yesterday. I just wanted to say a couple of things. Again, the resources that had mattered to me. I know this might be disappointing to internet savvy people. There's 201 Polish verbs. The historical Polish English dictionaries are invaluable for me. I've got a couple of them at my desk where I work at home. I always make sure to check those dictionaries and make sure that the use of a word from back then conforms with what I think it might mean now. A funny example is for a word that is now used for jeeps and rovers, like Mars rovers, but at the time when I'm working on it, had a very different sort of connotation. For more formal study, making sure that you're getting things right, the Słownik Poprawnej Polszczyzny is really an excellent resource. It's put out in multiple editions. And it's a great way, once you're further along in language study, to make sure that you're using the language properly and you see sort of preferred usages. Those little grammar cards. And then, of course, the elephant in the room, I didn't type it here, but Google Translate. I have a really interesting relationship with Google Translate. I have used it for years, and I found myself for the first decade or so making corrections and suggestions, so helping the AI, if you will, to improve wherever I thought that I had found a more felicitous interpretation or translation, or if I just thought it had outright gotten something wrong. Now Google Translate doesn't let you do that as easily. It's much harder to do that, and I think it's actually better. It's kind of worked. So I don't have to carry this dictionary with me into the archives anymore. I can use Google Translate as my sort of dictionary of first resort. And then I always belabor my translations. I make sure that I'm getting things right. I check those historical dictionaries. But it's a wonderful resource at the beginning. I find that I don't like to have websites translated. I'd much rather read them in the original the first time around, at least, and make sure that I get a sense of how they show up. I'm extremely grateful in the internet age that so many of the sources that I used to have to travel to Poland to get, like all of these newspapers, are now, almost all of them are available and scanned, and I can just pull them up with relative ease and use them wherever I have internet access. And then just for fun, one of the questions that Olga sent me was some sort of favorite things about the language. And I really love how, because of cases, it doesn't quite matter as much the order of things in a sentence or how, where you put things. And I love that you can split some words up, like this conditional, ja bym wolał tego nie zrobić, or I would prefer not to do that. I mean, literally, it's like and you're splitting up wolałbym, and then that, it not to do. The vocative case for me is really fun as someone who didn't grow up sort of studying Latin or learning a language with so many cases. And my instructor in 1995 used to always refer to me as Panie Natanie. And I really love the internal rhyme there. And I love the polite speech that's largely a historical legacy of the Polish language. Whenever I miss Poland, I just pretend I'm on a park bench and I try and speak polite Polish. Proszę panie, niech pan odpocznie tu obok mnie. Please, sir. Would sir please rest here next to me? So I'm happy to try and answer any questions insofar as I can be of use. Alexandra, I don't know that I have a lot of digital resources that I can point you to help your students. I'm sorry, I'm a graybeard here, and most of my Polish language study was before all of that. But thank you all for your attention, and thank you for the opportunity to share my own language journey. And I'll do my best to help, if at all possible, with your questions about studying Polish or just studying languages generally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Wood. We really appreciate it, and I hope everyone enjoyed the talk today. If anyone has a question, you can feel free to either type it in the chat or to unmute yourself and ask. And it looks like we have already a comment in the chat, so I'll read it out loud. Someone is recommending a resource called DeepL Translate over Google Translate, or in addition to Google Translate.
Excellent.
I have Johnny, your talk and our experiences of advice
Oh, you're cutting out
uh,
a little bit for us,
is
John.
that I
John, I'm not able to hear you very well. It seems to cut out a lot. I'm so sorry. I don't know.
I have it's telling me that my bandwidth is low. Uh,
It's better
so
now, just for what that's worth.
okay. Well, the one piece of advice I have, and I was in a particular situation, fortunate position, because I already knew some language from my family background, but I did not know, I never really, and what I was that people in Poland are surprised would know any Polish. So one should not hesitate to speak, even if you're making mistakes and you know your mistakes. I recall my first, I was there and I had been assigned to a particular Polish professor. He invited me over to his home, uh, and his wife had prepared a cake, and we were sitting there and talking, and I apologized that I don't know the endings of words, and don't bother, we can add the endings ourselves.
Yeah. John, thank you so much. I actually had meant to say that. Um, almost to a person.
Yes.
Poles have been extremely gracious and so pleasantly surprised that you're making an effort, that I've been making an effort to learn the language. I completely agree with you. I concur with that statement. Over 30 plus years now of going to the country and speaking Polish, I can only think of maybe one person who's been rude. Everyone else has been so happy and kind and helpful. Because I think it's just unusual for them, that it goes the other way, that people are making an effort to learn their language. And so you're right. You're absolutely right. Thank you. That's a great story.
Yes. And I do have one, and I do have another anecdote. I also uh, offered free English lessons because I wanted to get to know the graduate student under the professor that I was being counseled by. And the end result was he mentioned it to other people, and among the other people was the woman who became my wife.
Magnificent. Yeah.
Were you able to hear that?
Yes. Yes. So Brian, I thank you so much, John. Brian, I see a question in the chat. I'm going to read it out loud for everyone, just in case they don't have the chat open. You write, how would you categorize or group the fundamental aspects of Polish language in addition to grammar and vocab? And I want to make sure that I understand your question. I mean, I think what I'm not sure. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure that I understand. By fundamental aspects, do you mean the things that are most important in studying the language? Okay. I mean, well, it depends on what you want to use it for, of course. I was trying to make that point about it being a tool. Pronunciation, at least, is predictable. It's extremely difficult for non-Slavic speakers, but it's predictable. So I'm wearing my Skrzypek na dachu t-shirt, so Fiddler on the Roof t-shirt that I got in Poland in 1992 when I was in Wrocław. And that's kind of the joke that people have about Polish, is that it's a ton of consonants, like that word there. But at least Polish is consistent. So it always has the stress on the penultimate syllable. So you know that the word is going to be stressed right before the last syllable. And once you learn the rules about how you're supposed to say certain clusters of letters, say an RZ or an SZ or a CZ or something like that, SICI, then you can bluster your way through. It's not going to be easy, but you can work your way through with the pronunciation. So one of the things that bedevils non-native English speakers about English is how variable the spelling is and the pronunciation is, how unpredictable that is. And thankfully, that's something in Polish where that's not the case. The orthography, the pronunciation, it kind of makes sense. So that's one thing that comes to mind. But I think what's tricky for people who don't grow up speaking languages that have lots of cases is learning the cases, learning the endings that go with words, so that, you know, the ending of a word changes its use in a sentence. So grammar does matter there. Hopefully that helps. Any other Polish speakers here? If we'd be happy to have you chime in. Thank you.
Great. Well, if we don't have another question, I can ask one that was submitted in the Google form ahead of time. So this question is asking, have you done research in areas where there are multiple languages being spoken and used in the archives? And what kind of recommendations would you have for someone working in that sort of context?
Thank you so much for asking that one. I regret I didn't say something sooner about that. That's a really, really good question. And yes, I have. I've done research in Vienna and in Prague and in Lviv. And in those cases, you know, I've had to rely on the other languages that I've studied, or I've been looking for sources that might be in Polish. And it has been difficult for me. When I finished the first book project, I thought that my second book project would be about World War I in Galicia, the Habsburg Galicia, the part of the Habsburg Empire, sort of southern Poland and into western Ukraine, Krakow and Lviv. And when I went to the archives to do my first work in Ukraine, I felt kind of defeated, to be honest. It was really difficult for me because even though the sources I wanted to consult were in Polish, the finding guides were all in Ukrainian, and interacting with the other scholars there was in Ukrainian, the sort of the staff. And I'm not saying that I couldn't have bolstered my Ukrainian skills. The University of Kansas is one of the few institutions that has a really excellent Ukrainian language program. So I could have studied that and I could have worked to improve. And it's not impossible, but in my case, it seemed to be difficult just because I also had a really hard time getting access to archives. I was told that it was being remodeled or that there wasn't access to scholars in the summer that I went there. So I pivoted and I changed my subject. I'm sorry to give a dispiriting answer because I think that there are also good answers, inspiring answers, and that is that people who work in libraries, archivists, want to help, and so if you get to know local scholars and you do the work to know enough of the language that you need to use, you still can access materials. I mean, I think my point about language as a tool or a skill, I think that's really true. You just have to learn enough of it to be able to do the job that you need to do. And so that's a really good question, and extremely likely that the kind of work that, say, a historian would do is going to require knowing some other languages or using some other languages, but maybe not at a certain depth. In my case, I felt kind of defeated when I went to Lviv, especially because the archives I wanted to access were not open that summer. And I changed, but it doesn't mean that my own anecdotal experience has to, give a sort of a feeling of defeat to others. Alexandra, you've got your hand up.
Yes, just a comment on one you just mentioned about using the language for research. So the part of my role, as I said, I'm a subject specialist. So students who research topics related to Eastern Europe often come to see me, and they cover a lot of modern day topics. So they always come and ask me, oh, I want to search Polish newspapers and new keyword searches and this and that. I'm like, that's great. Everything is, it sounds like an exciting project, but I'm like, in order to search Polish newspapers, you have to speak Polish. And they're like, oh, what do you mean? There's no translations, isn't it? I'm like, of course there are some translations, but then you're losing the context. You're losing that that thing that you were just emphasizing about, the nuance, what the word means, right? And how it can be used sometimes, that you can say something and it has a negative meaning, but you're using the positive words, right? And all these little cultural things. But I experienced sort of the opposite to you, because I came to Canada when I was 20 to do university. So I was learning English as a person coming from Poland. So one thing was somebody told me, hey, first get a boyfriend and then you will start speaking English really quickly. And of course, don't hang out with Polish people. And the other thing was they were also making a point about starting to getting emerge in the culture. And I remember when I watched first episode of Seinfeld, when I actually understood what the jokes were all about, I was so proud and happy with myself. I was like, okay, I finally reached the point where I understand Seinfeld. I understand what the Simpsons are making fun of. So yeah, all those little things make a difference and certainly help. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experience. It's been very interesting to hear it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've had really bright moments. I'll never forget. One of my dear friends in Krakow is a sociologist who came to Indiana University while I was a graduate student there. And then when I went to do my dissertation research, my pre-dissertation research even, he helped me find a place to stay. And we've been friends ever since. And perhaps my favorite thing is when Lucian invites me to a garden party. And I'll never forget being at a garden party with a bunch of social scientists, his colleagues. And we're just sitting outside, eating, drinking together, chatting into the night. And there was a moment when I realized that I wasn't thinking in English. I wasn't aware of not being one of them. And I just was part of the conversation, and it was just beautiful. It was just this beautiful moment. And so you got to hold on to those, don't you? Just like when you get the Seinfeld jokes, you got to hang on to those, because there will be the other moments when you make an embarrassing mistake, like I did this summer with my cab driver. But it's inevitable. That's going to happen. I see some resources here in the chat: Polish scholarly prose and 2 words to the wise. I'd love to know a bit more about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. First of all, the Polish scholarly prose dates from 1981. It was a project that my wife and I carried out for maybe the Department of Education or something. Anyway, it was a grant. So it's an anthology of texts in various humanities and social sciences. It's out of print, but is available in lots of libraries. 2 words to the wise is the title of a column that I've been writing for the Polish newspaper Biały Orzeł, the Boston-based paper, since 2004. The most recent, it's a biweekly, so the most recent column was number 452. Wow. And the point of departure was the fact that in English, the idiom is a word to the wise is sufficient, but in Polish, it's 2 words. Mądregowie dość wiesłowie. And that's not a Polish joke, it's just the rhyme. Mądregowie dość wiesłowie. But that's not the end of it, because the wiesłowie is not the normal way of saying two words in contemporary Polish. It's an example of the ancient category of not only of the dual number. Not only was there in Older Slavic and in Latin and various other languages, in addition to singular and plural, there was something known as the dual case, the dual number rather, for when talking about two people or two things. So wiesłowie is an example of that, which is an archaism. It's also the title of the first collection of my columns, published by Slavica. That is in print. There's a second collection called More Words of the Wise, and there's a third one that's about to come out, also with Slavica, called Even More Words to the Wise. These are columns about Polish language, literature, folklore, and people have found them interesting.
Thank you so much.
And my name isn't Rar, those are my initials. I'm Robert Rothstein, or Bob Rothstein.
Oh my goodness, so good to see you. Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great. Do we have any other questions? You can feel free to ask
I just
them.
want to tell Robert how much I enjoyed reading literature with Bojana Shallcross, many of them and things that you had selected. Yeah, for language study. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Brian is asking in the chat the titles of the subsequent volumes.
Oh, the second volume is called More Words to the Wise, and the third that's about to be published is called Even More Words to the Wise. And this seems to be, those seem to be in lots of libraries. And they're still in print at Slavica.
So, Robert, are you saying that these would be a resource where you could sort of check your Polish skills, or you could learn some things about the language that you haven't realized before, or that deepen your knowledge and understanding? Just to be clear, right?
Yes, it's not going to help you directly with your knowledge of learning Polish, but it's background of various sorts.
Yeah, yeah.
And people, one of the commenters, person who commented on, said she was going to recommend it to everyone who teaches Polish. Recommend them. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing these to our attention.
Sure.
We do have a comment in the chat about the recording. So all of our sessions from this series are recorded and posted on YouTube, and it should be up by the end of the week. So we can email everyone who was registered today with a link. Do we have any other questions for our speaker before we wrap things up? It looks like everyone's had a chance to ask their questions. So thank you once again, Dr. Wood. It was wonderful to have you today and hear more about your experience. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you at our future sessions of Research in Language Learning. Have a good evening, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for doing this. Thank you for this program, and thanks for the opportunity. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Yes, thank you.